Over on Jaguar Gatorade, a new college football video is out. In this video, we talk about the bizarre way that Cal got invited to the Alamo Bowl in 1993. Click the card in the upper right corner to watch. And now, on with our feature presentation. This man right here is Cincinnati Bengals head coach Sam Wyche. If you know Wyche, you know of his rather, shall we say, crazy antics and his mouth, where he would say some of the wildest things. Let's just say that Wyche was quite the character as the head coach of the Bengals. He routinely bashed the officiating in the press conferences after games, from a controversial 1985 game against the New York Jets after Louis Breeden was called for a safety, to an awful 1989 game against the Seattle Seahawks where the referees might have hosed the Bengals out of a playoff spot, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. During that same game, he famously took a microphone and reminded fans not to throw objects on the field, because they don't live in Cleveland. He infamously had a meltdown on Monday Night Football during a 1991 game against the Buffalo Bills, which you can also learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. Whether Wyche was an actual good coach or not, you be the judge of that. But one thing is for certain, he was best known for the things that he did say, both to his team and to the press. Which is what makes this game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers all the more remarkable. Because during this game, he made one of the greatest coaching moves of his career with regards to what he didn't say. At halftime of their game against the Buccaneers, the Bengals found themselves at a crossroads, and found themselves in a bit of a predicament. But everything turned around at halftime. And the reason why it turned around at halftime? It had something to do with what happened in the locker room, and an amazing bit of restraint and trust that Wyche showed. It's a remarkable story, and it's one that, even though has been forgotten more than 30 years later, deserves to be remembered today. Because this is the story behind what has to be, in the over half-century-long history of the Cincinnati Bengals franchise, the craziest halftime in team history. Before I talk about what actually happened at halftime, and how it changed the entire complexion of the game, we need some context to understand, well, how the game was going beforehand, as well as what this game meant to the Bengals in their quest to repeat as AFC champions and possibly make it back to the Super Bowl. It's October 29th, 1989. It's Week 8 of the NFL season, and as we hit the halfway point, we have a big interconference battle on our hands over at Riverfront Stadium between the Cincinnati Bengals and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. For the purposes of this, we're just going to focus on what this game meant for the Bengals, because it's a lot. Because in terms of what this game meant for the Bengals, this game was everything. Through the first 5 weeks of the season, the Bengals were picking up right where they left off, as they were showing no signs of slowing down in their quest to win the AFC for the second straight season. They were 4-1, and they had a downright dominant team that offensively was just 11 points off of the Houston Oilers for the conference lead in first place, and defensively was just 3 points off of the Cleveland Browns for the conference lead. However, after a hot start, the Bengals entered this game in a somewhat surprising skid, as they had dropped 2 straight games, with both of them being at home. After losing 20-13 to the Miami Dolphins and 23-12 to the Indianapolis Colts, with the offense struggling for one of the first times all season, the Bengals found themselves in a hole. At this point, especially with how competitive the AFC Central had become, with 3 teams tied at 4-3, and the Pittsburgh Steelers only 1 game back at 3-4, this game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers felt like a must-win. You just lost back-to-back games to teams that did not have a winning record entering the contest. You were sliding pretty hard. If you lost to the Buccaneers, a team that had failed to win a road game against a non-NFC Central team since December 5th, 1982, when they beat the New Orleans Saints 13-10, and a team that, along with having failed to beat a non-divisional team on the road in 7 years, had gone 0-26 in that stretch, then it's time to hit the panic button. After what was an extremely promising start to their season, and was looking like a continuation of their 1988 campaign, 1989 was going to look like an incredibly shaky way to end the decade if they could not find a way to win this one and improve to 5-3. As for how this game was going so far, well, it wasn't pretty. I'll put it that way. When Tampa got the ball on their first drive after the Bengals punted it away, they got a 46-yard gain courtesy of Lars Tate on just their second play from scrimmage. Tate had played 7 games thus far as Tampa's starting running back that season. He had more games with fewer rushing yards than he picked up on that one play. And in the previous game that Tampa played, a 32-28 loss to Washington, he had 6 carries for 7 yards, having the worst game of his young career. And here he was, slicing and dicing up Cincinnati's run defense on just the second play. Not a good sign, especially when a few plays later, the Buccaneers struck first and found the end zone, following a 3-yard touchdown pass from Vinny Testaverde to Eric Hill. And Cincy continued to shoot themselves in the foot throughout the half. On their first drive, Boomer Esiason had Eddie Brown, a Pro Bowler and second-team All-Pro from last season, wide open for what would have been an easy touchdown. Instead, Brown drops it. And later, with the score tied at 7 apiece, it looked like Boomer Esiason had Tim McGee wide open, as McGee got past cornerback Ricky Reynolds on what looked like a post route with ease. By all accounts, this should have been a touchdown. This should have been a pitch and catch for last year's MVP. Instead, it fell incomplete. And one play later, Cincinnati compounded their mistake when James Brooks, after picking up the first down, fumbled the football, with the Buccaneers recovering near midfield. And a few drives later, the Bengals just gave the Buccaneers 2 free points after Esiason just lost control of the ball in the end zone, resulting in a safety. This entire first half for the Bengals was ugly with a capital U, as they were playing some extremely sloppy football and extremely uncharacteristic football if you compare it to the start of the season. In other words, Cincinnati was playing really poorly. Now the good news for the Bengals was that even despite their awful play, they were winning the game at halftime, as they led it 21-16, thanks to Boomer Esiason throwing an 8-yard touchdown pass to Eddie Brown with a few seconds left in the first half. As bad as Cincinnati was playing, and trust me, it was bad, as things stood, they were going to improve to 5-3, and would still hold on to at least a share of the AFC Central lead at the halfway point. But they were only winning because they were more talented, and not because they were playing well. It's like if you're playing a 1-year-old in a basketball game, and you win 21-0, but you only shot 5% from the field. Yeah, you won, because you're more talented and more physically gifted than the 1-year-old, but you very clearly didn't play well or shoot the ball well. Cincinnati knew that in the second half, things needed to change. They needed to regroup at the halftime break and figure things out. And right as Sam Wyche was getting ready to speak and talk about the first half, and get his guys ready for the new half of football, the players decided to kick him out of the locker room. Seriously, the head coach was kicked out of the locker room by his own players. As Wyche was getting ready to address the team, he was approached by none other than this man right here, the team's starting left tackle, Anthony Munoz. For those who don't know, Munoz is one of the greatest offensive linemen of all time, and has a legitimate claim for being the greatest offensive tackle in the history of the sport. I'd be here all day if I listed every single accolade that Munoz had in his career, because along with being a Hall of Famer, a now-named Walter Payton Man of the Year award, an All-1980s First Team member, an NFL 100 team member, a 9-time First Team All-Pro by the Associated Press, a 2-time Second Team All-Pro by the Associated Press, an 11-time Pro Bowler, and a vote-getter for Offensive Player of the Year, which is almost unheard of for an offensive tackle, he was an anchor on Cincinnati's offense. And Munoz told Wyche to stay out of the locker room at halftime. It wasn't that he had anything against Wyche, or disagreed with anything that Wyche said. Heck, Munoz had a great relationship with Wyche, and even contemplated playing for him when he left for Tampa Bay a few years later. And if you don't believe me, when Wyche passed away at the start of 2020, Munoz had nothing but nice things to say about the man, saying he truly cared about the community and the people he associated with, the homeless and those in need. When you have a head coach who was successful, but also showed some success in the community, that's what his legacy is. So let's make it clear. This was not a battle of Munoz versus Wyche. Rather, Munoz felt that the most effective way to drive the point home across that the first half was not good enough was to have a players-only meeting. Air it all out. The team had won a few days prior after their loss to Indianapolis. And now, Munoz wanted to do it again, airing everything out without fear of repercussion in the limited time that they had in the locker room. It was an incredibly risky strategy, and an incredibly bold strategy at that. No halftime adjustments in the locker room. No trying to figure out what to do or what adjustments to make. No talk about tendencies or anything like that. Absolutely nothing. Under this plan by Anthony Munoz, Sam Wyche would not even be present. He'd just be outside, completely oblivious as to what was going on and to what was being said. The normally outspoken coach would have to keep his mouth shut and stay out of the locker room, waiting for his team to come out whenever they were done, and not knowing what was mentioned. But Wyche trusted Munoz, and said 3 words when Munoz brought this up. "It's all yours." That's all it took. Those 3 words put the wheels in motion. As unconventional as it was to have a players-only meeting in the middle of the game at halftime, Wyche felt that if Munoz was coming to him and saying they should do this, then they were going to do this. As for what was said with Wyche out of the room, there seemed to be a very common theme about intensity and not letting up. Wide receiver Eddie Brown said on this meeting, "Coach left us alone. We decided to gather ourselves and make something happen." Anthony Munoz, the man who organized this, said, "We took it upon ourselves to turn up the intensity. We said, let's go out and play hard the next 30 minutes. We didn't want what happened the last couple of games to happen again." And linebacker Reggie Williams said on the meeting, "We were going to start the second half like we started the game." There was a lot of screaming and a lot of pounding on the chest. He continued, saying, "It was a spontaneous thing with a lot of yelling. Some guys stood up and talked, and then we held hands. The feeling I got in the dressing room at halftime was one of the best feelings I've ever gotten in football." So that raises the ultimate question. Did this crazy halftime move work? Did kicking out the coach of his own locker room pay off? And did whatever was said in the locker room without the presence of any coaches make a difference at all? Well, based on these second half highlights, I'll let you be the judge of that. Because in the second half, the Bengals played, quite possibly, their greatest half of football, not just of the 1989 season, but in the over 20 years that the team had been around. The second half of this game was nothing short of dominant, because what started off as a super close affair turned into a blowout, with the Bengals winning it 56-23, and the game not even being that close, as it was 56-16 before a garbage time touchdown and extra point by the Bucs late in the fourth quarter. Before they pulled the starters, the Bengals, quite literally, scored a touchdown on every single drive that they had in the second half of the game. That's how dominant it was. Cincinnati started the second half on a 35-0 run, thanks to 3 touchdown passes by Boomer Esiason, a touchdown run by James Brooks, and even a touchdown pass by backup quarterback Eric Willem, who was taking his first ever NFL snap, and was so good in his limited action that he finished the game in his 6 pass attempts with a perfect passer rating of 158.3. Yes, it's a small sample size, but it does not get any higher than that. By the time the game ended, the Bengals had 482 yards of total offense, including 5.7 yards per carry. Boomer Esiason had 5 touchdown passes, the defense forced 4 turnovers, and 3 players had multiple receiving touchdowns, with Tim McGee, Ronnie Holman, and Eddie Brown each finding the end zone on 2 separate occasions. The 56 points scored set a Riverfront Stadium record, which would be topped not even 2 months later when they scored 61 against their division rival, the Houston Oilers, and was the second most points scored in franchise history, only behind their 61-point output in 1972 against the Oilers, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. It was an exceptional game for the Bengals, and for the first time in a while, they looked like the formidable contenders in the AFC that people pegged them as at the start of the season. And as for what Sam Wyche said on the halftime thing, seeing as it clearly worked out, I'm gonna let them handle it from now on. They do a better job than I do. So yeah, this was a resounding success. When you're barely winning at the half and playing sloppy, and you score 35 straight to open up the next half, you clearly did something right. Whatever was said worked like a charm. But most important, if this story teaches anything, it's how important leadership is. Part of what makes a good leader is knowing what to say, when to say it, and how to say it. And as Sam Wyche and the Bengals found out on this day, sometimes the best thing you can do is say nothing at all. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, and subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at Jaguar Gator 9. To see college football videos, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.